Welcome to How to Mechanics. In this video, I'll be showing how to do a full inspection on your Case IH combine. This is going to be a very in-depth video going over everything I do on a preseason inspection. This video will also be very helpful for when you go to buy a used combine. Even though these are 8250s, I will also be referencing some problems with the older models as well. And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any more Case IH content that I post in the future. These combines both have the exact same hours, just under 1,000 threshing hours, and about 1,300 engine hours. Alright, now let's get into the video. To start off with, I always remove every access panel that I can. Remove all the shields around the PTO shafts, the metal covers that go over the monkey gearbox, all these covers as well. Remove the side panels. You want to drop at least the front two concaves or all of them if you want. You just want to make sure you can see most of your RAS bars. Then you're going to go ahead and remove all the belts. Remove the outside one on the chopper, and the inside one you kind of leave there dangling. Lift up your spreader and move it out of the way. On the right hand side, remove the belt on the return, and on the chopper as well. One thing to note before you remove the return grain belt is check this distance right here. If it's in adjustment and sitting tight like this before you remove the belt, it needs to be replaced. A new belt usually has 2 inches of clearance between the arm and the bracket. Open up the bottom covers on the return and clean grain. Remove the right hand shields as well. If you want, you can also remove the right hand side concaves, but I usually just leave them in for inspections. And remove all the belts on the inside. Okay, with all the belts and panels removed, we can officially start our inspection. I always like to start on the front and then work my way around. So on the bottom of the feeder house, you want to check for wear in this area. These can get pretty wore down, so you just want to check it, and you might have to add some weld to it. Looking at the feeder chain, this is pretty worn out. I definitely recommend putting a new one in there. Just check out the wear on the roller and the gap between the chains. The whole thing is starting to separate from itself, and it definitely needs to be replaced. And as I go along on this inspection, there's one thing to note. Not all this will be the same replacement interval for everybody. It really depends on how many acres you do a year. So let's say this customer does 1,000 acres a year, he could maybe get by with his feeder chain. But if you're planning on doing 4,000 acres on this combine, I would definitely recommend doing that. And we're going to be kind of going back and forth between that this whole inspection. Another thing to look for is wear on this drum. You want to make sure the chain is centered and it's not riding on the edge. If it is, then you definitely have an alignment issue or you have a bearing or something going out. There are 2 roller bearings on both sides of the roller. It's pretty hard to check those without taking the whole chain off and rolling it. Then you're going to look at the feeder chain bars. Make sure none of them are bent or missing. If one is bent, it can definitely put a bind on things and wear things out a lot faster and put a lot of extra stress on the chain itself. And while we're on the front side, go ahead and take a quick look over the whole entire front end. You want to look for anything cracked, bent, or broken. Grab a pry bar and we're going to pry up on these bearings. This is checking the rock beater bearing and the feeder chain drive sprocket bearing. On the header gearbox drive, inspect the splines, oil level, and the breather. Make sure these breathers aren't plugged up because they can blow out seals prematurely. On this side, check for cracks as well, oil leaks, anything like that. Look at your chain tension and you can adjust that. If you're maxed out, then you know for sure that you need a new feeder chain. Check the U-joint, make sure it's nice and tight. Moving up to the feeder chain gearbox. Check your oil level when it's in the correct position. Look at the breather, make sure that's not plugged up. And any external oil leaks that you can see. Go ahead and check the U-joints here. If you see any movement inside the U-joint while you're moving it up or down or left and right, it needs to be replaced. Push up and down on these carrier bearings. These are a pretty common problem, so you definitely want to check these out. Just push up and down on the bottom of it, and you'll physically see it move up and down. If they do move, then you need to get them replaced. And then check the U-joint right here. Moving through the top of the feeder house, we're going to look inside of this inspection hole. Check out your feeder chain slats. Make sure they're nice and straight like we talked about before. And on the older models, the plastic wear strip here wears out pretty fast. You want to keep an eye on that. If it's wearing through into the metal, you definitely want to get those replaced with the new ones. Looking into the upper access hole, we can look at the feeder chain sprocket. This one is over 50% worn, just to show you kind of what it looks like. When you replace the feeder chain, you should always replace the sprocket as a pair. The only exception to that is if you're in the middle of harvest and you don't have time to change both at the same time. This view of the sprocket shows it's about 50% wore out. The next thing we're going to do is check the splines on the feeder chain and the rock beater. Hold a feeder chain slot with one hand and then rock the rock beater back and forth. We're checking the splines between the rock beater and the gearbox. This is more than I would like to see, but it's not horrible. If you have excessive rocking back and forth, then you definitely have an issue. Now hold the rock beater solid and rock the feeder chain sprocket back and forth. If you have 2 or 3 times more movement than this, I would definitely replace your splines. Inspect your wear bars on the rock beater. You can spin it by hand and get a good look at everything. You want to make sure the lip of these wear bars are not completely worn out. There are slots on the rock beater wear bars, so you can extend them out if you need to. The splines on the rock beater and feeder chain sprocket are a pretty common issue on the older style combines, so this is something you want to keep a note of and check every year. If it gets excessive, you want to get them replaced. Now we're going to be inside taking a look at the rotor cone. It is not easy to be able to look inside of here, so if you have to, take your phone and camera and take a video of it. Right now we're looking at the rotor cage vanes, and this side needs to be replaced. When you're looking at the rotor cage vanes, brand new, the width is the same as the height. So that'll give you a reference on how worn out they are. This will show you a new set versus an old set. These are ones I actually took out of this combine. Notice how thin it gets in a lot of these places. It's down to like 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And some of the vanes have been completely worn down to where they're flat. This is showing you the difference between a new and old vane, so you kind of have an idea of when they need to be replaced. And while you're in this area, you want to check your elephant ear wear plates. These are completely worn out and it's actually wearing into the elephant ear itself. These have been replaced, and this shows you just how much they've worn out. I will have a short video on replacing these, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video. While you're looking inside the cone, make sure you don't see any holes or any damage. Now we're going to be moving up top to look at the half moon cover. These half moon covers can wear out and get holes in them, so make sure you inspect that. Take a good look at your rotor bearing and make sure there's no obvious signs of failure. And inspect the silicone in this area for holes as well. Moving on to the left side of the machine, check your chains and your sprockets. If you're running out of adjustment, then you know it's time to replace your chain. Or if the sprocket teeth are starting to curl over, then you definitely want to change out your sprockets. And right now is a good time to adjust the chain tension. Inspect your Auger gearbox oil level. These can be a major problem after a rain because that seal will fail and all the water from a rain will run into that gearbox and fill it full of water. Inspect the sight glass, make sure it's not full of water, and I always change those gearboxes every year with new oil. And then we're going to go ahead and inspect these U-joints. Looking at the rotor itself, we're going to spin it around and look at the RAS bars. Make sure to put it in neutral when you're doing this. My rule of thumb, if you have standard RAS bars, once you can't read the STD, or if the bolt is 1/2 or 3/4 of the way gone, it's time to replace. Spin it around and check each one individually. And as a reminder, when you go to replace these, replace them as pairs to keep everything in balance. As you're going around, check for welds, any cracks, anything like that. If you see any problems, now is the time to get it fixed. And like I just said, whatever you do on one side, you have to do to the other side to keep everything balanced. This is a close look up one that's just about worn out. I'd probably replace this before the beginning of the season. The STD is almost gone and the bolt is over halfway worn through. Here's a good look at a high wear RAS bar. This one is perfectly fine. I would do nothing with this one. Inspect your concaves for any damage or missing bars. You want to look at your left side cone and make sure there's not a lot of wear in this area. Now looking in through the rotor cage. With your phone, or if you can get your head in there, you can actually get a better look at all the vanes and the elephant ear wear plate from this angle. Now we're going to take a good look at your bottom grain pan for any cracks or anything that looks abnormal. I do have a full how-to video on my channel on how to adjust your concave opening. So that's definitely something you want to check out and do that before every season. And while you're in this area, make sure there's no bolts missing, pins, or anything like that. It's pretty surprising what will come apart during normal operation. And on the 50 series, they have had issues on these rotor cage vanes. They'll bind up and you'll have issues, so make sure they're nice and clean. And there has been issues with these turnbuckles actually breaking, so just make sure you check those out. This is a good time while you're in this area to check your pre-sieve. Right now, you're just doing a visual inspection to make sure there's nothing missing and everything looks right. You want to move the sieve up and down to check the operation of it. It's a good idea to make sure your gearbox is actually shifting and it's going into first, second, and third gear. And then you want to check and make sure that your stationary chopper knives can move up and down. If they don't move, then you'll probably have something jammed up or there's a problem with the linkage. On the hydraulic system, just do a visual inspection and make sure you have no external leaks. Moving down to the shaker shoe drive, take a good look at the belt, make sure it's not ripped or dry rotted. This one's in pretty rough shape, so I'd probably recommend getting a new one. When you bend it in the opposite direction, there's a lot of large tears in it. Spin the idler pulleys to check the bearings. The one in the back is a little bit hard to reach. This next part is a little tricky and you want to be careful so you don't smash your fingers. Spin the whole shaker assembly to check for any abnormal noises. And then it's hard to tell sometimes, but you can shake it slightly and put your hand on this large bearing and see if it's going out. On your shaker shoe bushings, you want to do a visual inspection on these. Make sure they're not dry rotted, cracked or split, or metal on metal rubbing. You can try taking a pry bar and moving them up or down or left and right to see if there's any movement. If you feel a harsh shake in the cab, that usually means that these bushings are going out. And when you're doing your grain pan inspection, if your pan is cracked out, that's also an indication that these are shot. Okay, now moving to the batteries, remove your negative posts and charge them individually. I also recommend doing a load test on them. I'm not going to go over all the oil and filter change intervals. That's something you can easily find in your owner's manual. Take a visual inspection and make sure there's no external oil leaks in these areas. With your belts removed, we're going to check the chopper drive system. Spin the idler pulleys and make sure their bearings are okay in those. And one thing I forgot to record is make sure the idler arms move up and down freely. They can get seized up and not tension the belt correctly. Put your hand on the backside of these idlers and feel for the bolt. I have seen these bolts back out and almost rub holes into the PTO gearbox. I would consider this to be the most important thing you want to check in your combines every year. And that's going to be checking these bearings on this chopper drive system. So you want to check it in high speed and listen for any abnormal noises. This is how they should sound because these bearings were replaced less than 100 hours ago. What you're wanting to listen for is bearings dropping, ticking, anything like that usually indicates that a bearing is going out. Another check you can do is check the temperature of these while they're running. These bearings do run pretty warm, so if they get over that 250 degrees range, then you know you have a problem with them. Okay, now we're going to hold the big pulley and spin the smaller one to check those bearings. These ones sound pretty good. You can maybe hear a slight ticking, but I wouldn't consider that too much. We're also picking up some other noises with my mic, so it sounds a little worse than it does in person. Shift it into low speed. This will check some other bearings inside that you can't check in the high speed. Hold the large pulley and spin the small pulley. And now spin the large pulley to check the whole system. So on this combine, these ones sound good. I'm going to show you on the other combine because those ones need to be replaced, what it sounds like. You can just tell how much drier the bearings sound. I will have a full how-to video on replacing these bearings, so check that out on my channel. This is the bearing in there that was making all the noise. This is the sound of one that's completely failed and destroyed. Okay, let's get back to the combine inspection. Take a visual look at all these bushings. Make sure they're not cracked, ripped, or dry rotted. Moving over to the self-leveling system, physically move the shaker system left and right to check the tightness of it. You don't want it tight, but you just want a little bit of movement. This one could be tightened up just a tiny bit. Spin the bearing, make sure it's not seized up. And later in this video, I'll be showing the other side. That's the side that usually has all the problems. To adjust these, there's two bolts. There's one on top, one on the bottom. The bottom one has a slot, so you're able to slide it left and right. And so what you want to do is you're going to measure from this point to the frame, and then on the other side, you're going to do the exact same thing, and you want to get it centered. Well, let's say this side is at 5 inches, and the other side is at 5.5. You want to move the other side to 5.25, and this side to 5.25. That way they're equal on both sides. It usually rides hard on the right-hand side, and so you want to check for wear in this area. These can get so out of whack that the shaker system will actually rub on the frame. And that's why it's important to keep the shaker system centered. Check the bushings on your end dump pan. Try to move the whole thing back and forth. There's always going to be a little bit of movement, but you don't want it over excessive. Also look for any cracks or anything like that in this area as well. One thing I recommend to do every year is to clean out your sieve loss sensor. This will get jam-packed full of straw and chaff, and it's a good idea to keep it clean, especially with combines with automation, because it uses this sensor to determine how to clean the grain better. On both the left and right side, you're going to pull these pins and lower this pan down. This will gain us access to look underneath the sieves. And we're going to be looking at this rubber flap. You want to look for any rips or anything in this, because what will happen is it'll rip off and then it'll slide down through the pan and plug up your return grain system. And when it does that, it can wipe out these belts and bearings. Inside the machine, we're going to be looking at the sieves. Look for any sieves that are missing, broken, or bent. One thing I always recommend, it's kind of a pain to do every year, but is pull your sieves out and clean them. It's the best way to make sure they're operating correctly and that you have no issues. Especially with these automated machines, these are moving up and down constantly. But if you decide not to pull them out, you definitely want to open and close them fully to make sure they're operating. Knock out any rocks that are jammed in them before you try to move them up or down. I do have a full how-to video removing and inspecting these sieves, as well as a calibration, so make sure to check that out. Moving to the chopper system, inspect this area for any damage. Look for any broken or damaged stationary chopper blades. And then spin the chopper around to inspect all the blades. These ones are pretty worn down, so I definitely recommend flipping them before the beginning of the season. Dull chopper blades can consume up to 20% of engine power. So it's very important to keep these sharp and to flip them when they get worn down. Make sure none of them are developing any cracks or anything like that too before you flip them. If these break off, they can do a lot of damage to your combine. Another thing to note, these need to stay in balance just like the rotor, so you gotta flip them in pairs. But usually if you flip one, you're gonna be flipping all of them. This backside cover is getting worn through, so it needs to get replaced. To inspect this next spot, you're gonna take your phone and have it on flash. Reach up behind and then take a picture of this area. What we're doing is we're making sure that the bolt that's holding the rotor gear on is still in place. That bolt over time can loosen up and fall out, and that drive gear can slide down and not make full contact with the rotor. I wish I had a picture of one that's failed so I could show you, but if you can see splines and a snap ring kind of in this area, that usually indicates that the bolt has failed and backed out, which is worst case scenario because you have to remove the entire rotor to get that fixed. Another way to tell if the bolt has actually completely fallen out, you'll be able to hear it rolling around inside the rotor if you spin it. On this inside light, you don't want any power to these. I usually just unplug them so then there's no chance of a fire. If somebody leaves the light on and this glass is broken, it's an easy way to catch something on fire. Just do a quick visual inspection on the backside. Looking at the spreaders, you're going to check for oil leaks or any damage. On the backside here, the rubber bump stop is ripped, so that will probably need to be replaced so it's not slamming on the frame metal to metal. Now moving on to the right side of the machine. Like we talked about previously, we're going to check this right side self-leveling system roller. This is the side that usually always has the problems. The machine naturally likes to ride on the right-hand side. These are the updated ones. They don't have that plastic roller anymore. On the old style versions, the plastic roller will actually wear into that shaft, and that causes a lot of play in the self-leveling system. So if you're having issues getting it centered, you're going to want to look into replacing that shaft and roller. And then do a visual inspection on your bushings on this side as well. Moving to the return grain system or Rethrasher, go ahead and spin all the pulleys to check all the bearings. On this one, the noise you're hearing is the slop between the paddle and the shaft. The two set screws will back out and cause slop in that paddle. So you want to remove that back cover, take those set screws out, put blue Loctite on them, and then tighten them back down, and it'll get rid of that slop. Check the return angled gearbox for any oil leakage. These do not hold very much oil at all, so if you have any leakage, you want to check your oil level. And when you spin the pulley on this gearbox, that slop is completely normal, so don't be alarmed by that. Another pretty common issue with these is they crack out in this area. So what we've done is welded a bar in this area to stiffen it back up. This is looking on the backside where it's been welded. You can kind of see the crack right there. So that's just something to look for when you're doing your inspection. This is a really common area where you get holes in the system. So you want to keep an eye on that and get them welded up. And then just take a visual look at the whole entire system. These can get a lot of cracks in a lot of areas, so you just want to look over the whole entire thing. Another common spot where these crack out is where it gets mounted to the frame. So you want to take a really good look right here. Go ahead and spin the chopper and listen to the bearings on that. Like I talked about before, you're going to be listening for any ticking, grinding noises, or anything like that when you're spinning these. Call up to the backside and spin all the pulleys back here. The bushings on these are a pretty common failure, so check those and move it back and forth. Another really common issue with these, there's a plastic half moon bushing inside of this. It'll get worn down and this arm will start wearing into the bracket. So every 2 years or so, to prevent that, I just replace that black plastic piece. The one on the left is worn out and the one on the right is the brand new one. You can kind of see how it wears through them. On these suction fans, there's a lot of problems with these as well. The bearings on these seem to fail pretty often. And when they fail, the fan on the inside gets all bent up, so you got to replace that as well. The idler arm bushing on these is another high wear point. You want to do a visual inspection on this fan housing. They do get worn out and then they'll crack and break, so you just want to keep an eye on that. Once again, check the centering plastic piece. This one does not wear out like the other one does on that other arm. And then check the bushing on this idler arm. One thing I do recommend is to drill and tap a greaser into these bushings. I wish Case would just do that from factory. Now we're going to take a look at your clean grain elevator drive system. I usually just grab the belt and spin the whole system, and then do a visual inspection on all the bearings and the chain. On the automated machines, you want to do inspection on your camera system. Open it up, clean the lens, and make sure there's nothing cracked or anything like that. And on the sampling auger, you can pull that out and do an inspection on that. Just pull this pin here and slide it out. Up above, check your chain tension. And once again, just take a visual look at these bearings. There's really no good way to check these or spin them without the machine running. To check this bearing, have somebody on the other side spin it while you're on this side checking it out. Take a good look at the fan mounting bracket. I have seen a couple of these brackets fail and crack, so just take a good visual look at the whole bracket itself. We're going to check out the concaves on this side, do a visual inspection, and make sure they're not damaged or anything like that. Take a look at the bottom grain pan. We're looking for cracks again. And then the return grain chute, there's usually always a hole that gets worn in this spot right here. This hole won't affect anything, but if it gets really bad, you can just weld another piece onto it. I like to take a look inside of the return grain chute. You get a good view of the upper paddle. And like I said before, that clunking on these is completely normal. Basically what we're looking for right now is any damage to the paddles or an oil leak from the gearbox. And then from this angle, take another look at your suction fan housing. Moving on to the wheels. Case is known for having issues with these breaking all the time. It seems like on these newer 50 series, they don't break as much, but you can still just want to check them out and make sure they're not broken. Moving on underneath the machine, we're going to start from the front and work our way back. You're going to look at these pins, make sure none of these bolts are broken or missing. I did an inspection on one of these and the bolt broke and the pin worked its way out and almost fell out. And then just check the same thing on the other side. Look for any oil leaks underneath the gearboxes. Check the back pins as well. And then underneath the feeder house pan, you want to check here on the older models. There's usually always a wear hole right here in this area. It's updated on these new machines, but if you have an older one, you definitely want to check that out because you could be losing a lot of grain on the ground. Open the cover to take a visual look at the top of the transmission. This one is covered in dirt, plus the breather is plugged up. So we're going to want to get that dirt out of there and clean out the breather. And while you're there, take a look at the bottom of the cone. On the transmission, check your sight glass, make sure you got oil in it, and just look for any external leaks. This one has quite a bit of seepage around it, but I think that's from the breather being plugged up. Check all 4 drive coupler bolts, make sure they haven't fallen out or broken. Inspect the final drive oil and look for external leaks as well. We're going to want to check out the fan. You want to spin it around and make sure you don't hear any blades that sound loose. Also check to make sure that they're in the correct position. Those little tabs should be locked into the fan blades. Then you're going to check the bearings on both sides. Take a visual look at your cross auger and check out the bearing as well. On this one, you kind of just got to wiggle it up and down to see if there's any movement. But on the return grain auger, you can easily spin that one and check that. Slide over and check the bottom paddle. After a while, these can actually get holes worn through them and weird wear spots. This one's pretty worn, but it should last the season no problem. Check for any holes on the bottom. Over time, these can wear out and you can lose a bunch of grain onto the ground. This seal right before the clean grain elevator is starting to fail. This needs to be pushed back into the correct position. This flatting on this clean grain is getting pretty wore out. And like I said before, depending on how many acres you do in a season, really determines whether the stuff needs to be replaced right away or if it can go another year. I'm going to let this one slide for another year, but after that it probably needs to get replaced. Check the elevator chain tightness. You don't want it super tight, you just want a little bit of movement in there. This one could be tightened up just a little bit more. Working our way to the back of the self-leveling system underneath. You have your center pivot bearing. There's a bracket on top. I've been seeing these brackets crack out quite a bit. And then if you don't change them after a while, they'll chunk out. And it'll cause a hard, rough spot when the self-leveling system is trying to rotate. You can see this one is cracked in half right there. It's a pretty easy fix. Jack up the leveling system. There's 2 bolts on both the 2 sides. Slide it out, put the new piece in there, bolt it in, and you're ready to go. Inspect the seals on the shaker system. Check to make sure the rivets haven't popped out and it's making a tight seal. And then we're going to be moving up to the top of the machine to finish off this inspection. The hydraulic oil reservoir is low, so we're going to need to add oil to that. Check your PTO gearbox and your rotor gearbox oil levels, as well as the engine. This intake line is way down and needs to be pushed back up. And then take a good look at the whole filter intake system over here. Make sure the hose clamps and everything like that is nice and tight. Next, we're going to look at the fan bearings. These are a really high failure point on these combines. It is very important to check these before they go out, because when they do go out, a lot of times the fan will actually hit the radiator. So instead of just replacing the bearings, you're replacing the radiator, the fan, just the whole works. Spin the engine fan idler pulley and check the arm bushing on this one. They seem to be a pretty high failure point. You can tell this bushing is starting to get quite a bit of play in it, but it should be fine for this year. Spin the alternator, check the bearings in that. You want to check all the idler bearings as well. On the tensioner itself, you don't want any side-to-side movement. On your fuel tank breather filter, I like to blow them out or change them every year so your fuel tank doesn't collapse. And then we're going to be doing a visual inspection. Just check for any wiring harnesses that are cracked or broken, fuel leaks or oil leaks, just anything you can see that's out of the ordinary. Moving on to the top left side, you can get a good look at your chains and belts from up here. Once again, it's kind of hard to check these without the machine running. And on every gearbox, every year I recommend cleaning out the breather filters. Keeping these breather filters clean can prevent a lot of issues. On the exhaust side, check all your hose clamps. You don't want to have any leaking exhaust. Especially with a lot of chaff blowing everywhere, it could cause a fire. Another filter that gets looked past a lot is your engine's crankcase breather filter. Don't forget to change that about every 600 hours. Now we're going to move our way to the back side of the motor so we can check the belts and bearings back here. And I don't know why, but this bearing is the one that usually goes out on these machines. And currently this one is seized up completely solid right now. This is why you want to do inspections like this every single year, because you never know what issues you're going to find. Don't forget to spin your water pump to fill the bearings in there. And if you're curious to know how to replace this engine idler bearing, you have to loosen the engine dampener bolts and then slide the dampener forward about an inch, and that'll give you just enough room to get that out of there. On the older style machines, you have your clean air assembly here. Those bearings on that shaft are notorious for always going out. So if you have that style of combine, do not forget to check those. Another note on older style combines, These remote engine oil lines rub on the rotor gearbox. So you definitely want to check that and make sure yours aren't rubbing through. They finally rerouted them so we don't have that problem anymore. Check the U-joints on the rotor gearbox drive, and then do a visual inspection on the backside of the motor. Once again, you're just looking for anything that's out of the ordinary. Broken wiring harnesses, missing bolts, clamps that aren't tight, things like that. Clean and check your gearbox breathers. Let's head back to the top of the engine. Check your coolant level. And on the older models, when they had the coolant reservoir located over there, they were exposed to a lot more heat and they tended to crack out underneath. That's something to keep mindful because after about 1,000 hours, you want to keep a spare one of these in your shop. It's not a matter of if it will, it's a matter of when it cracks out. Spin the clean air fan screen. Check the brushes, make sure they're not completely worn out. Before you open the door, you want to check the seal, make sure it's nice and tight. If you're having a lot of plugging issues in the radiator, that seal may be bad. And check for cracks in this area as well. I've seen these crack out too. Spin and check the bearings. Do a visual inspection on the radiators, make sure they're not plugged up. And look what I just found, this bearing is completely shot. That is the main reason you have to do this every year. You just never know what you're going to find. And then spin and check the bearings on the inside of the fan. Inside the grain tank, we're going to visually check the auger bearings. And then take a look at your flighting. It's kind of your call on whether you want to replace it or not. This has quite a bit of wear, but it's still going to do its job. And the last spot you really want to check is the top of your clean grain elevator. Nothing's worse than having a hole up here and then you're losing a bunch of grain you never knew about. You can also get a good look at your upper sprocket and bearings. And last but not least, on your bubble up gearboxes, just check for any external leaks. And that concludes my full routine I do on my combine inspections. These particular machines usually just cut wheat. So depending on what you're cutting, you might have a lot different wear points than I have on these ones. But one thing I cannot stress enough is you have to do the full inspection every single year. You just never know what you're going to find. I've inspected machines with 300 to 400 hours on them and I still find probably 5 or 10 issues with them. And please, down in the comments, if there's anything I missed, feel free to let me know and to let others know as well. I'm building this channel to help you guys out the best way I possibly can because I know there's not very much information on these combines out there. So if you could, just please hit that subscribe button. It really helps my channel and that way you won't miss out on any future content. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.